She had 30 seconds to decide. Stand up from the wheelchair and destroy her mother's life, or keep sitting and lose what was left of her childhood. 9-year-old Sophie looked at the boy who'd exposed her secret, then at the man who'd been pushing her wheelchair every Sunday for 6 months. "Will you still love Mama?" she whispered. And in that moment, everyone realized this wasn't about a disability. This was about a lie so big, it had stolen 2 years of a child's life. Let me tell you how we got here. And I promise, the ending will restore your faith in humanity. Welcome to the story room. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. You know, sometimes we see people every single day and think we know their story. We see a child in a wheelchair and we feel sympathy. We see a devoted mother and we admire her sacrifice. We see what we're supposed to see. But what if everything we're looking at is a lie? Let me tell you about a man named Daniel Cooper. He was a successful architect in his mid-30s, the kind of man who designed beautiful buildings and lived what most people would call a blessed life. 6 months ago, he met a woman named Linda at a charity event. She was elegant, soft-spoken, and she came with a daughter named Sophie, a 9-year-old girl who sat quietly in a wheelchair. Linda told Daniel that Sophie had been in a terrible car accident 2 years earlier, the same accident that killed her husband. The injuries had left Sophie unable to walk. There were medical reports, doctor visits, a special school for children with disabilities. Everything seemed legitimate. Everything seemed tragic, but real. Daniel fell in love, not just with Linda, but with Sophie too. He proposed after 4 months, and Linda said yes. Since then, every Sunday afternoon, Daniel would take Sophie to Maple Grove Park while Linda attended her book club. It became their special time together. But here's the thing about Sophie. She never smiled. Not really. Sure, she'd give you a polite nod when you spoke to her. She'd say, "Yes, Daniel," or "Thank you, Daniel," in that whisper-soft voice. But her eyes, those beautiful brown eyes, they carried a sadness that Daniel couldn't quite understand. A weight that seemed too heavy for such a small child. On this particular Sunday, the weather was perfect. Golden autumn leaves covered the walking paths, and the air smelled like wood smoke and possibility. Daniel pushed Sophie's wheelchair along their usual route, talking about his week, about the new building his firm was designing, trying as always to make her smile. "It's going to have a rooftop garden," he told her enthusiastically, "with flowers and trees, a whole forest in the sky. Would you like that, Sophie?" "Yes, Daniel," she replied quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her spine straight as if she were sitting for a formal photograph. They rounded the corner near the duck pond, and that's when everything changed. That's when a boy appeared on the path in front of them. He looked about 11 years old, with dark curly hair and wearing a jacket that was 2 sizes too big, probably a hand-me-down. His sneakers were held together with duct tape, and there was dirt under his fingernails like he'd been working or playing hard. But it was his eyes that struck Daniel, old eyes in a young face, eyes that had seen things most children shouldn't see. The boy planted himself directly in their path and didn't move. "Excuse me, son," Daniel said politely, beginning to steer the wheelchair around him. But the boy stepped to the side, blocking them again. And then he said 7 words that would shatter Daniel's entire world. "Sir, that little girl can walk." Time seemed to stop. Daniel's hands froze on the wheelchair handles. His heart began to pound in his chest like it was trying to escape. "What did you say?" Daniel asked, his voice coming out strangled. The boy looked him straight in the eye, no fear, just absolute certainty. "She can walk. I've seen her. When that woman, your girlfriend, when she's not around, Sophie runs and plays like any other kid." Daniel felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. He looked down at Sophie, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The little girl had gone completely pale. Her small hands were gripping the armrests of the wheelchair, so tightly her knuckles had turned white. And in her eyes, there was pure terror. "Son," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady, even though his whole world was tilting sideways. "That's a very serious accusation. Sophie was in a car accident. She has medical records. She sees specialists." The boy shook his head firmly. No accident. I live in the apartments across from the park. I'm here every day after school. 3 weeks ago, I saw her by this pond, right over there. He pointed. She was skipping stones into the water. She was running. She was laughing. She looked happy, really happy. Not like now. Daniel's mind was spinning. He thought about the disability checks Linda received every month. He thought about the life insurance money from Sophie's father, held in a special trust fund for her care. He thought about how Linda had cried when she told him about the accident, how she'd showed him the medical reports with shaking hands. But then he thought about something else. Something that had been bothering him for weeks, but he'd pushed aside because questioning it felt wrong, felt cruel. Sophie never asked to get out of the wheelchair. Not once. Most children, even disabled children, wanted to try, wanted to move, wanted independence. But Sophie just sat there, day after day, like a doll positioned in a chair. Daniel's throat felt tight as he crouched down beside the wheelchair, bringing himself to Sophie's eye level. "Sophie," he said gently, his voice breaking slightly. "Sweetheart, I need you to look at me." Slowly, those sad brown eyes met his. Is what this boy is saying true? Can you walk? And that's when it happened. That's when the dam finally broke. Tears began streaming down Sophie's face, not just a few tears, but huge, racking sobs that shook her tiny body. Daniel had never seen her cry before. In 6 months, he'd never seen her show this much emotion. I'm not supposed to tell," Sophie gasped between sobs. "Mama said if I tell anyone, something terrible will happen. She said we need the money. She said Daddy would want us to be safe." Daniel felt like the ground had opened up beneath him. He reached out and took Sophie's small, trembling hand in his. "Sophie, honey, nothing bad is going to happen. I promise you. You're safe with me. Do you understand? You're safe." The boy, still standing there, spoke up. "My name's Tyler," he said. "I didn't want to say anything before. I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was a different girl. But I kept seeing her in that chair, looking so sad, and I kept remembering how happy she looked when she was running. And then today, when I saw you with her, you looked like a good man. Like someone who would listen. Like someone who would help her." Daniel looked at this brave kid, this boy who probably had his own problems, his own struggles, and yet he'd found the courage to speak up for a stranger. "Tyler," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion, "thank you. You did something incredibly brave today." He turned back to Sophie, his heart breaking for this child who'd been carrying such a terrible burden. "Sophie, I need to ask you something very important, and I need you to tell me the truth, okay? Can you do that for me?" Sophie nodded, still crying. "Can you stand up from this wheelchair?" The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Sophie looked at Tyler, who gave her an encouraging nod. Then she looked back at Daniel, and her next words absolutely destroyed him. "Will you still love Mama if I do?" Daniel's vision blurred with tears. This 9-year-old child, this precious little girl, had been imprisoned in a wheelchair, forced to give up running and playing and being a kid, all to protect her mother. All because she loved her mother and wanted to help her. "Sophie," Daniel said, his voice breaking, "I will make sure you're taken care of no matter what happens. But right now, the most important thing in the whole world is the truth. Can you stand up, sweetheart?" For a long moment, Sophie just sat there, tears streaming down her face. Then, slowly, she placed her small hands on the armrests, and inch by inch, she pushed herself up. She stood on shaky legs, not because she was weak, not because she couldn't walk, but because she'd been sitting in that chair for so long, pretending to be someone she wasn't, giving up her childhood for a lie. "I'm sorry," Sophie sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. Mama said we needed the money for our house, for my school, for everything. She said Daddy's accident left us with nothing, and this was just making things fair. She said the insurance company and the government had lots of money, and we deserved it because of what happened to Daddy." Daniel pulled Sophie into his arms and held her while she cried. Tyler stood nearby, wiping his own eyes with the sleeve of his too-big jacket. "You have nothing to apologize for," Daniel whispered into Sophie's hair. "Not one single thing. You were trying to be a good daughter. But what your mother asked you to do, Sophie, it wasn't right. It wasn't fair to you. Standing there in that park, holding a sobbing 9-year-old who'd just been freed from an invisible prison, Daniel knew his life was about to change completely. And he knew what he had to do next, no matter how much it hurt. He pulled out his phone and made the hardest calls of his life. First to his lawyer, then to Child Protective Services, then to the police. And as he made those calls, Tyler sat down on a bench nearby and waited, this brave kid who'd spoken up when no one else would. This boy who'd seen something wrong and refused to let it continue. Within an hour, the park was filled with police cars and social workers. Sophie told her story again, this time to officials who documented everything. Linda was located at her book club and arrested on the spot for fraud and child endangerment. The investigation that followed revealed everything. There had been no car accident. Sophie had never been injured. Linda had invented the entire story after her husband died, seeing it as a way to collect disability payments and insurance money. She'd coached Sophie on what to say, how to act, and most heartbreaking of all, she'd convinced her daughter that this deception was an act of love, a way to honor her dead father's memory. Sophie had been trapped, not by broken legs, but by love and fear and the desperate desire to be a good daughter to a mother who'd asked the impossible of her. The days after the truth came out were some of the hardest of Daniel's life. Sophie couldn't stay with him. They weren't legally related, and Linda's arrest meant the child needed immediate placement. Social services arranged for her to stay temporarily with Daniel's older sister, Rebecca, who had 3 kids of her own and a home full of warmth and noise and life. Daniel visited every single day, sometimes twice a day. He'd show up after work still in his suit and tie, and Rebecca would meet him at the door with understanding eyes. "She's in the backyard," Rebecca would say. And Daniel would go through the house and find Sophie, usually sitting alone, watching Rebecca's kids play but not joining in. The first week was the hardest. Sophie barely spoke. She moved carefully, as if she'd forgotten how to be a child who could run and jump. The muscles in her legs were fine, the doctors confirmed, but 2 years of sitting had taken a different kind of toll. One afternoon, Daniel found her sitting on the back porch steps, her arms wrapped around her knees. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, sitting down beside her. "How are you doing today?" "I miss her," Sophie whispered. "Is that bad?" "That I miss Mama, even though she lied?" Daniel's heart squeezed. "No, honey. It's not bad at all. She's your mother. It's okay to love her and be angry at her at the same time." "Do you hate her?" Sophie asked, looking up at him with those big brown eyes. Daniel thought carefully before answering. "I'm angry at the choices she made. I'm angry that she hurt you. But hate? No. I think your mother was scared and desperate, and she made terrible decisions. That doesn't make them right, but it makes her human." Sophie leaned against his shoulder, and they sat there in silence for a while. But something else was happening too, something Daniel hadn't expected. Tyler, the boy from the park, started showing up. The first time was 3 days after the incident. Rebecca answered the door to find Tyler standing there in his oversized jacket, holding a small bouquet of dandelions. "I picked these for Sophie," he said shyly, "to make her feel better." Rebecca invited him in, and from that day forward, Tyler became a regular visitor. Daniel learned that the boy lived with his grandmother in a small apartment near the park. His mother worked as a night nurse at the hospital and a day shift at a grocery store, trying to keep them afloat. Tyler spent most of his time alone, watching the world go by, seeing things other people missed. "My grandma says I notice things," Tyler told Daniel one day. "She says it's a gift, but sometimes it feels like a burden, you know? Seeing things that aren't right and wondering if you should say something." "The world needs people like you," Daniel said firmly. "People who have the courage to speak up." Slowly, day by day, Sophie began to change. It started with small things. She laughed at one of Rebecca's kids' jokes. She asked to go outside. She took a few running steps, then stopped, looking guilty, until Rebecca encouraged her to keep going. "You're allowed to play now," Rebecca said gently. "You're allowed to be a kid." Before the story continues, subscribe. These stories are written to change lives. 2 weeks after the incident, Daniel arrived to find Sophie and Tyler in the backyard, kicking a soccer ball back and forth. Sophie was laughing, actually laughing, a sound Daniel realized he'd never heard before. He stood at the window watching them, tears streaming down his face. "She's going to be okay," Rebecca said, coming to stand beside him. "It'll take time, but she's going to be okay." But Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Tyler. This kid who'd changed everything, who'd spoken up when he could have easily walked away. Daniel started asking questions and learned that Tyler's family was struggling. His grandmother needed medication they sometimes couldn't afford. Tyler wore hand-me-down clothes and often went to the park instead of home because the apartment was too small and crowded. One evening, Daniel asked Tyler to take a walk with him. They went to the same bench where everything had started. "Tyler," Daniel said, "I want to talk to you about something important." The boy looked nervous. "Am I in trouble?" "No," Daniel said quickly. "The opposite. What you did that day in the park, speaking up for Sophie, that took real courage. You could have ignored what you saw. Most people would have. But you didn't, and because of that, you saved a little girl from years more of suffering." Tyler shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "My grandma always says that when you see something wrong and you don't speak up, you become part of the wrong. I didn't want to be part of hurting Sophie." Daniel pulled out his business card and pressed it into Tyler's hand. "I want you to keep this. And I want you to promise me something." "What?" "If you or your family ever need anything, anything at all, you call me. And when you're ready for college, I want to talk to you about a scholarship program my architecture firm runs. The world needs more people like you, Tyler. People who stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Tyler's eyes went wide. "You'd really do that? For me?" "For you," Daniel said firmly. "You changed 2 lives that day, Tyler. Sophie's and mine. That kind of courage deserves to be rewarded." 3 months passed. Autumn turned to winter, and the trees in Maple Grove Park stood bare against gray skies. But inside Rebecca's house, something beautiful was growing. Sophie had started therapy, meeting twice a week with a counselor who specialized in child trauma. It wasn't easy. Some days Sophie would come out of her sessions red-eyed and exhausted. But other days, she'd emerge looking lighter, as if someone had lifted invisible weights from her shoulders. "Dr. Patterson says I'm allowed to be angry at Mama," Sophie told Daniel one day. "She says loving someone and being angry at them can happen at the same time." "Dr. Patterson is right," Daniel said. "Are you still angry at Mama?" Sophie asked. Daniel chose his words carefully. "I'm angry at what she did to you. But mostly, I'm sad. Sad that she felt so desperate, so scared, that she thought this was her only option. And I'm sad that she hurt the person she was supposed to protect most." Sophie nodded slowly, processing this. Then, she said something that surprised him. "I wrote her a letter. Dr. Patterson helped me. I haven't sent it yet, but I wrote down all the things I wanted to say to her." "That's really brave, Sophie. Do you think she misses me?" Sophie's voice was so small, so vulnerable. "I know she does," Daniel said. "Whatever else is true, I believe your mother loves you." But loving someone and hurting them aren't opposites, Daniel was learning. Sometimes they exist together in complicated, painful ways. Meanwhile, Tyler had become like part of the family. He came over several times a week, doing homework at Rebecca's kitchen table, playing with Sophie and the other kids, slowly becoming the big brother Sophie had never had. Daniel started paying for Tyler's grandmother's medications. When Tyler's mother's car broke down, Daniel had it fixed. When Tyler needed new clothes for school, they mysteriously appeared. Tyler's grandmother figured out what was happening pretty quickly. She called Daniel one evening, her voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Cooper, I don't know how to thank you. You raised an extraordinary grandson," Daniel said. "That's thanks enough. He talks about you all the time," she said. "About Sophie, about how he helped her. It's given him purpose, you know? Made him feel like his voice matters." "His voice does matter," Daniel said firmly. "More than he knows." As winter progressed, Daniel made a decision that surprised even him. He began adoption proceedings for Sophie. His lawyer warned him it would be complicated, that Linda would have to voluntarily give up her parental rights or have them terminated by the court. But when Daniel visited Linda in jail, bringing Sophie's letter with him, something unexpected happened. Linda looked older, smaller, diminished by orange prison scrubs and the weight of what she'd done. When she saw Daniel, she started crying before he even sat down. "Is Sophie okay?" were her first words.
"She's healing," Daniel said.
"But it's going to take time." "I never meant to hurt her," Linda whispered. After Michael died, I was so scared. The bills were piling up, and I couldn't sleep, and I kept thinking about how we were going to lose everything. And then I remembered the disability benefits, and I thought it was the answer. "You trapped your daughter, Linda. For 2 years, you stole her childhood." "I know." Linda's voice broke. "I know, and I hate myself for it. Every single day." Daniel slid Sophie's letter across the table. "She wrote this for you. Do you want to read it?" Linda's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Daniel watched her face as she read, watched the tears stream down her cheeks, watched the moment when her daughter's words broke through whatever walls she'd built around her guilt. When she finished, Linda looked up at him. "She says she loves me. After everything I did, she says she still loves me." "Children have incredible capacity for forgiveness," Daniel said. "But that doesn't mean there aren't consequences." "I know," Linda whispered. "I'm going to sign the papers. The adoption papers. Sophie deserves better than me. She deserves you." 6 months after that day in the park, Daniel stood in a courtroom wearing his best suit, his hand resting protectively on Sophie's shoulder. The judge, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes, looked down at them from her bench. "Mr. Cooper," she said, "adoption is a serious commitment. You understand that you'll be taking on full legal and financial responsibility for this child." "I understand, Your Honor," Daniel said. "And there's nothing in this world I want more." The judge looked at Sophie. "And you, young lady? Do you want Mr. Cooper to become your father?" Sophie looked up at Daniel, and for the first time since he'd known her, she smiled. Really smiled, the kind of smile that reaches your eyes and lights up your whole face. "Yes," she said clearly. "I want Daniel to be my dad." The judge's gavel came down. "Then it's my pleasure to grant this adoption. Congratulations to you both." The courtroom, filled with Rebecca and her family, Tyler and his grandmother, Daniel's friends and colleagues, erupted in applause. Daniel knelt down and pulled Sophie into his arms, both of them crying happy tears. "You're my daughter now," he whispered. "Forever." "Forever," Sophie repeated, holding him tight. After the hearing, they all went to Maple Grove Park, the place where everything had changed. It was a warm spring day, and the trees were covered in new green leaves. The world felt full of possibility. Daniel watched Sophie run, really run, her legs pumping hard, her hair flying behind her. Tyler was chasing her, both of them laughing. Rebecca's kids joined in, and soon there was a whole group of children racing around the pond where Tyler had once seen a sad girl skipping stones alone. "She looks happy," a voice said beside him. Daniel turned to find Tyler's grandmother standing there. "She is happy. Finally." "And you?" she asked. "Are you happy?" Daniel thought about the question. 6 months ago, he thought he had his life figured out. He was engaged, successful, building toward a future he thought he wanted. But that future had been built on lies. "I'm happier than I've ever been," he said honestly. "I didn't just gain a daughter. I gained a purpose." Tyler came running over, out of breath. "Dad," he said, then stopped, blushing. "I mean, Mr. Cooper." Daniel felt his heart swell. Tyler had started calling him Dad accidentally a few weeks ago, and every time it happened, it felt like a gift. "Tyler," Daniel said, "I wanted to talk to you about something." The boy looked nervous. "What?" "You know how Sophie's adoption just became final today?" Tyler nodded. "Well, I've been thinking. You spend so much time at our house. You're such an important part of Sophie's life, of my life. And I talked to your mom and your grandmother and—" Daniel paused, emotion catching in his throat. "How would you feel about joining our family officially? Not adoption, because you have a wonderful mother, but guardianship? You'd keep your name, keep your relationships, but legally, you'd be part of our family too." Tyler's mouth fell open. His grandmother was crying softly behind him. "You want me?" Tyler whispered. "Even though I'm not a little kid? Even though I'm almost 12. Especially because of who you are," Daniel said. "You're brave, you're kind, you see things other people miss. You're exactly the kind of person I want in my family." Tyler threw his arms around Daniel, and Daniel held him. This boy who'd changed everything, who'd spoken truth when silence would have been easier. Later, as the sun began to set over the park, casting everything in golden light, Daniel sat on a bench watching his family. Because that's what they were now, a family. Not traditional, not what he'd imagined, but real and true and built on honesty. Sophie ran over and climbed onto his lap, tired from playing. Tyler sat down beside them, and Rebecca's kids piled around them like puppies.
"Dad,"
Sophie said. She'd started calling him that right after the adoption. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Mama would be happy?" "That I'm happy." Daniel thought carefully. "I think the best part of your mother, the part that really loved you, would be glad you're safe and happy. And I hope someday she finds her own happiness too." "Me too," Sophie said softly. Tyler spoke up. "My grandma says that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things. Like, if that bad stuff with your mom hadn't happened, we wouldn't all be together now." "Your grandmother is a wise woman," Daniel said. As darkness fell and the park lights came on, Daniel carried a sleepy Sophie to the car, Tyler walking beside them. And he thought about how truth, even painful truth, is what sets us free. Sophie had been freed from a wheelchair she never needed. Tyler had been freed from poverty and uncertainty.
And Daniel?
He'd been freed from a life built on lies and found a real family instead. Sometimes, he thought, the smallest voice speaks the loudest truth. And sometimes a boy in a too-big jacket and taped-together shoes sees what everyone else misses. That night, tucking Sophie into bed in her new room in his house, their house, Daniel said, "I love you, sweetheart." "I love you too, Dad," Sophie whispered. Then, just before she fell asleep, she added, "Thank you for believing Tyler. Thank you for believing me." "Always," Daniel promised. "I will always believe you." And he kept that promise every single day for the rest of their lives. This story reminds us that courage doesn't always come from the people we expect. Sometimes it comes from a child who sees something wrong and refuses to stay silent. It reminds us that love shouldn't hurt, that protecting someone means giving them freedom, not taking it away. And it shows us that families aren't just made by blood, they're made by truth, by choice, by people who show up and stay. If this story touched your heart, share it. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that their voice matters, that speaking up can change lives, and that the truth, no matter how hard it is to tell, will always set us free. Thanks for your watching. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to the Story Room for meaningful stories that inspire and teach life lessons.